Welcome to Decoding Leadership, where we break down the elements of humane and effective leadership. I'm your host, Jade Rubick. Hi, everyone. It's September 2024, and recently Paul Graham published a piece that has been making the rounds. And this piece is called Founder Mode. And you find that all over the place, people have opinions on it. I think Graham's post is simultaneously vague, really hard to parse. It has some seeds of some very interesting and insightful content, but it also has some dangerous or harmful notions baked into it that I think can really get people into trouble. So I'm calling this piece Learning from Founder Mode, because I want to pull out the nuggets of what I think are really useful about this notion of founder mode, and also expose what I think are some potentially harmful aspects of it. Before we get into the discussion about founder mode, I'm going to just briefly review his post in case you haven't read it or you want a refresher. So he starts off by saying that a lot of the conventional wisdom about how to build companies is wrong, and that a lot of founders receive this advice to hire good people and give them room to do their jobs. And there was a person that apparently spoke at some event that Graham attended that spent a lot of time studying Steve Jobs and trying to find a better way of operating. Paul Graham was very impressed by this talk, and the central thesis of it seems to be that this idea of hiring people and giving them room to do their jobs is a very harmful advice for founders. And so Paul Graham's conclusion was, this advice works if you're a professional manager, but it's bad advice for a founder. And I want to really call that out. Hiring people and giving them room to do their jobs is good advice for a professional manager and bad advice for a founder. So let's come back to that in a little bit. Paul Graham presents this notion that there are two different ways of running a company. There's founder mode and manager mode. Manager mode is basically a well-organized set of black boxes that are designed to encapsulate the different parts of the company. And the chief guidance in manager mode is to not micromanage, because you're dealing with these encapsulations. And founder mode, the idea that he's exploring, because he's clearly exploring this idea. He hasn't thought it through completely. He's not even really totally sure what it is. But the idea of founder mode is that you break the idea of working only through direct reports, and that micromanaging is often desirable. He talks about skip level meetings being an example of founder mode, which I find highly suspect because that's a very managerial concept. And he cites this example of Steve Jobs running an annual retreat at Apple for what he considered to be the 100 most important people in the company. And this is a founder mode concept because you would never be able to do that in a manager mode approach. Further, Paul Graham said that founders often feel gaslit from both managers and from employees, and that the founders needed to stay true to their instinct of remaining in founder mode. So that's the summary of Paul Graham's essay. I actually don't think that separating this by founders and non-founders is helpful at all. Micromanaging is both harmful and desirable in certain circumstances. Professional managers relying on modularity and founders being opposed to it sets them up in conflict with each other, when I think that really what matters is the results. Professional managers should engage in whatever it takes to be effective, and founders should as well. My experience in Silicon Valley has been that many founders lack very much management experience. So they lack the sense of when to micromanage and how. And this is actually why I view this piece as potentially dangerous. Yes, if you're experienced and you have a good sense of the trade-offs that you're making when you're micromanaging and when you're breaking this modularity and this black box of the hierarchy of your organization, you understand the trade-offs that you're making. And the problem is a lot of founders don't. So yeah, I think it's really important to develop this sense of what the trade-offs are. I'm not going to rehash a lot of how to do this well. I recently had a blog post on being a bottleneck leader. And I think I go into a lot of different ways that you can more effectively delegate. Delegation does not mean that you cannot intervene when things aren't going well. And I think founders also need to really understand the signals that they should act upon to dig into situations. So that's my first objection, is that I feel like it's predicated on a very weak argument, which is this idea of hiring people and letting them figure it out is actually, I totally agree. It's really bad advice for founders, but it's actually just really bad advice for leaders in general. And you need a more sophisticated or more nuanced delegation model, which is that you delegate to the level of trust and you try to build trust over time. And you train and you monitor, but you also are trying to ultimately set up a company that doesn't rely upon you. And to do that, you are setting up black boxes, but they're not actually black boxes. If you're using a software metaphor, you want encapsulation, but you also want observability. You would like metrics. You would like signs that show you that the software is behaving the way you expect. You want alerts that call you to attention. And sometimes you dig into your debugger and you inspect that encapsulated code. And sometimes it's appropriate for you to micromanage. But those are much more nuanced than founders should just go with their gut and micromanage to their heart's content. And professional managers should not. Because actually, professional managers should do all those things as well. What I've seen a lot is founders operating with a lot of hubris and really giving in to their gut feelings about how to run an organization and causing an incredible amount of damage. I've seen several startups actually fail just because the founders were taking this type of advice to heart and they weren't really building a company. They were pushing people continually in the directions that felt right to them. Managing your anxieties is actually a very core founder skill. So I want to nitpick a couple points and then I'm going to leave it there. First of all, one thing that made me a little nervous about his piece was that it's kind of buying into this anti-professional manager meme that I think is actually kind of dangerous for a lot of startups. What he was giving as examples were examples of poor management. And I guess there's kind of a problem with founders, like knowing when they're getting good results out of their managers. And that's a whole other topic. I guess that's a lot of what my business is helping founders set up effective management. And so I've seen this a lot, that you can go to extremes where you either are just think management is completely bad, or you can completely rely on your managers. But there's actually a middle ground that is much, much more effective. And I would say actually some of the best startups I've been a part of have had very effective management. That is like a core differentiator, because what are managers? What are leaders? A leader is somebody that makes good results out of a group of people. And that's ultimately what a company is. So having an effective leadership team is the way to build a company. So when he talks about founders feeling gaslit, there are reasons why sometimes founders are given a lot of feedback that their behavior is harmful or it's causing problems for their company. And so I think for founders to navigate that, it sometimes requires a skill that the founders don't have. It's like, how do they know that they're getting good results out of their managers? So I think the way founders actually productively engage in founder mode is to look at the results that you're trying to drive and engage with your managers to produce those results. And if you're not getting, if a manager is not making a situation better, then they're probably not being an effective manager. Good managers can sometimes not produce good results if they don't have skills in the type of problems that you're dealing with. That is my thoughts on founder mode. It has some kernels of truth to it. There's some interesting advice there, but I would say founders need to be careful with that advice. Yes, you should operate across your company, but there's also a cost for doing that.